Welcome to 1820. If you were to take a snapshot of the global economy at this exact moment, you would find a world that looks fundamentally different from ours today. The total economic output of the entire human race amounted to roughly $694 billion in today's money. To put that into perspective, that is less than the modern-day GDP of Switzerland alone. For over a millennium, economic growth was virtually non-existent. According to historical data, the pre-industrial world was trapped in a cycle of stagnation. The annual GDP growth rate hovered at a microscopic 0.1%. Before the 19th century, the global economy was essentially a zero-sum game. Wealth was not created, it was merely conquered or inherited. As populations grew, the economic pie simply divided into smaller slices rather than expanding. Then came the Great Divergence. Starting in Western Europe, the Industrial Revolution fundamentally broke the rules of the global economy. Human muscle was replaced by fossil fuels. For the first time in human history, economies began to grow at an unprecedented rate of 2 to 3% annually. While 2% might sound small, compounded over decades, it creates astronomical wealth. How did this happen? Economist Robert Solow identified three main drivers of economic growth: capital accumulation, labor, and technological progress. In the 19th century, Western Europe hit the jackpot on all three. But the story of how every country got rich is also the story of why some didn't. The economic explosion of the West did not happen in a vacuum. Colonialism and unequal trade policies played a massive role in creating a persistent global wealth gap. While Western economies were building capital, colonized nations were subjected to resource extraction. Their local industries, like India's booming pre-industrial textile market, were systematically dismantled to prevent competition with British factories. Following the devastation of two world wars, the global economy faced a critical reset. Millions of lives were lost, and physical capital across Europe and Asia was reduced to ash. But what followed from the 1950s to the 1970s was an economic miracle. Post-war recovery fueled a massive global expansion. Japan and West Germany transformed from war-torn nations into manufacturing powerhouses almost overnight. Why did they recover so quickly? The answer lies in institutional economics. Institutions matter. They are the rules of long-term prosperity requires strong, inclusive institutions, secure property rights, the rule of law, and stable governance. Without these, investors won't invest and entrepreneurs won't build. Simultaneously, human capital theory emphasizes that a nation's greatest asset is its people's brains. Massive public education drives transformed unskilled laborers into highly productive engineers and innovators. Physical factories can be bombed, but an educated populace is indestructible. As we enter the late 20th century, the narrative shifts dramatically from the West to the East. The period post-1990s is defined by the explosive rise of emerging economies. By opening up to global trade and embracing market reforms, nations like China and India became the new engines of global growth. They perfectly executed the solo growth model on an unprecedented, massive scale. China became the factory of the world, combining foreign capital with an immense labor force. Meanwhile, India leveraged its highly educated workforce to dominate global IT and services. The result? Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of extreme poverty in just a few decades. This stands as the fastest wealth creation event in human history, proving the power of integration into the global supply chain. This brings us to the modern era. By the year 2020, the global economy had transformed into an interconnected digital leviathan, pulsing with trade and innovation. Global GDP expanded from roughly $694 billion to over $84 trillion. That is a 120-fold increase in real economic value. The pie hasn't just grown, it has exploded, creating a world where the average citizen today enjoys luxuries that kings in 1820 could not even fathom. Yet the title of our journey is How Every Country Got Rich. or didn't. Despite the $84 trillion global pie, profound inequality remains. Why are some countries still poor? Many developing nations fall into the middle income trap. They grow rapidly by providing cheap labor and exporting raw materials, but they fail to transition to high-value, innovation-driven economies. They hit a glass ceiling. Escaping poverty requires pivoting. Cheap labor and natural resources are enough to start economic growth, but they are not enough to finish it. Without strong institutions and heavy investment in human capital, nations cannot move up the value chain. As we look back at the 200 years of GDP data, the recipe for national wealth becomes clear. It is not determined by geography, race, or ancient history. Wealth is a choice, driven by three pillars: tech, institutions, and human capital. The global economy is no longer a zero-sum game. The pie can keep growing. Over the long arc of history, human ingenuity and technological advancement consistently overcome periods of crisis. Prosperity is engineered, not inherited. By building the right frameworks today, we can ensure that global wealth is both expanding and inclusive for the centuries to come. The only question is, what will the map look like in 2120?